Once prison doors close behind a criminal, they usually don't open again until after the sentence is served. Yoshie Shiratori did not see the point of waiting so long. In fact, he managed to overcome all the strict security measures of various prisons an unbelievable 4 times, and thus went down in the history of Japan as the man no prison could hold. In this video, we show you with which fierce skills and adventurous tricks the prisoner can manage to outsmart the justice again and again. So, stay tuned here at Wonderlane. Oh, and write us in the comments whether you think prison sentences are still appropriate. Yoshie Shiratori was born in 1907 in Aomori in Japan, and struggled through his youth and young adulthood with a variety of jobs. For example, he worked as a salesman in a tofu store, or went to Russia as a fisherman where he caught and sold crabs. But Yoshie could not really get along with any of his jobs, and so he changed his job again and again and tried something new. When he realized that he wasn't really good at anything, he started to earn his living by gambling and stealing. He did not commit any serious crimes, but since Yoshie naturally got involved with shady people, he was suddenly falsely accused of robbery and murder. Although the petty criminal was innocent in this regard, in 1936, at the age of 29, he was imprisoned in the Aomori prison in his hometown. Of course, Yoshie, like probably all other prisoners, did not want to stay here, and so he began to make an escape plan. To do this, the prisoner meticulously observed the daily routine of the guards from his cell every single day for several months and memorized every little thing. Once Yoshie knew exactly when and for how long the prison staff was out of sight, he removed the metal wire that served as a handle for his bath bucket, bent it to shape, and used it to pick the lock of his cell. Before that, he also put boards in his bed and covered them up so that it looked from the outside as if he was still in his bed and asleep. After that, he actually managed to escape from the prison unnoticed. However, Yoshie's trip to freedom was not supposed to last long. After all, he had no money or food with him and had to get supplies somewhere, so he tried to steal some food from a hospital. In the process, the Japanese man was caught and arrested, and just 3 days after his escape, he ended up back in Aomori prison, where he had to spend a few years under strict security until 1942, when it was decided that Yoshie should receive an even harder punishment for the theft and his escape. And so, in 1942, the prisoner was then transferred to Akita prison for a life sentence. Here, he was even placed in a special cell that was considered completely escape-proof. The cell, which was specially designed for crafty escapees, had a very high ceiling, walls made of smooth copper, and only a small skylight. Nevertheless, with nights of practice, Yoshie eventually managed to climb the smooth walls and reach the small window at the top. As the wood of the window frame became more rotten over time, the escapee loosened it bit by bit each night until he was finally able to open the window in the ceiling. Yoshie knew that the guards would hear him if he climbed onto the roof and ran away across it. So, he waited until one night there was a violent storm and finally fled unnoticed into the icy cold. It was not as easy as the first time to catch Yoshie again. In fact, he struggled through 3 months of freedom, and then went himself to the house of one of his former guards. The guard was the only person who was nice to Yoshie during his stay in prison, and therefore he hoped for help from him. Yoshie wanted to join him in fighting the injustice of the Japanese justice system. Unfortunately for him, the guard called the police, and Yoshie was arrested again. The 35-year-old was then transferred to Abashiri prison, the northernmost and harshest prison in the country. Here, Yoshie was forced to sit on the floor in an outdoor cell in extreme cold, and was beaten by the guards if he even dared to stand up. In addition, he had to wear handcuffs almost permanently. To the amazement of the guards, one day, Yoshie actually managed to break open the handcuffs right in front of them. So, they finally put special handcuffs on him that were only opened once a week when he was allowed to bathe. The handcuffs were so secure that it took a specialist 2 hours to open them each time. In addition, he was also put on an anklet. Since Yoshie wanted to live in freedom again, he developed a new escape plan. Unnoticed, he poured a little of his miso soup on certain parts of the handcuffs and the anklet, and so the metal slowly rusted through. In 1944, he finally managed to destroy the chains and used a night when the whole prison was blacked out because of the war to make his escape. Yoshie dislocated both shoulders and squeezed through the food slot in his door. Afterwards, the Japanese man was able to leave the prison unnoticed and spent the next 2 years living in an abandoned mine hidden deep in the mountains. However, when he stole a tomato from the field of a nearby farm, Yoshie was caught by the farmer and attacked. Yoshie fought back and stabbed the farmer, which would put him back in prison after his 2 years of freedom. For his earlier outbursts and the death of the farmer, Yoshie now no longer received a prison sentence, but was sentenced directly to death. Until that time came, he was to serve time in a high-security cell in Sapporo prison. Again, there were very high, smooth walls and a skylight. However, the skylight was so small that not even Yoshie's head would have fit through it. Because the guards thought that the inmate could not possibly escape, they did not even handcuff him. Their mistake was to concentrate only on the possibility of an escape through the roof. Yoshie had already hatched a new plan, and so it happened as it had to. Yoshie used his soup bowls as shovels to gradually dig a tunnel into the ground, and finally escaped for the 4th time in 1947. After a year on the run, Yoshie was walking through a park when he met a friendly policeman. The policeman offered him a cigarette, and Yoshie was so impressed by this kindness that he then volunteered to tell him who he was and that the policeman could arrest him. And so, once again, the Japanese man was sent to prison. However, fortunately for him, his case was retired in court, and it was determined that his attack on the farmer was self-defense, and that he had not attacked or injured anyone during any of his outbursts. Therefore, his death sentence was then commuted to 20 years in prison, and he was locked up in Fuchu prison in Tokyo. In 1961, after 14 years, Yoshie was then released there for good behavior and returned to his hometown of Aomori, where his daughter lived. His wife, whom he had hardly seen during their marriage due to his many years in prison, had died by then. Afterwards, Yoshie Shiratori struggled along for about 10 more years in freedom with various jobs, until he finally died of a heart attack in 1979 at the age of 71. His ashes were buried at Mount Fuji by a neighbor who took care of Yoshie during his last years. Due to his spectacular escapes, Yoshie Shiratori is still considered a legendary anti-hero in Japanese folklore. During his escapes, he sometimes ran up to 120 kilometers a day, and thanks to his good sense of direction, he was able to find his way everywhere. The Abashiri Prison Museum even has a monument dedicated to Yoshie, and there are also books, a blog, a film, and a documentary about the legendary escapee. The man no prison could stop. Write us in the comments with which method you would try to break out of prison. Don't forget to give us a like and a subscription if you love this video. See you next time, here at Wonderlane.